Hi, everyone. Stephen Vantassel here, wildlife control consultant, giving you another podcast of the Pest Geek podcast of living the wildlife. And we're glad to have you with us today. And don't forget to take a few minutes to subscribe. Tell us what you're thinking. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I have a very special guest today, and you all will be very intrigued with what she has to say because she has a criticism of me. Yes, I'm sure a lot of you will be very happy to hear that. So yes, the great Stephen Vantassel does make mistakes, and you will hear it here before you hear it somewhere else. So we're really glad to have her on board. Her name is Dr. Hennessy. So she is from, is it Ohio State?
Ohio State's where I got my master's. I got
I-
my PhD from Purdue.
Purdue. Okay.
Yeah.
And where are you at now?
I'm at Eureka College.
Eureka College. All
I'm
right.
sure you've heard of it, right?
I have not heard of it, but don't look at me because I'm more. My background is more theology than wildlife. I came.
Well, we started off as a seminary, actually.
You did.
Yeah, and we were the college that graduated Ronald Reagan, so that's kind of our claim to
no
fame.
kidding. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so we are nestled about halfway between Peoria and Bloomington, Illinois.
Okay.
Half an hour in either direction.
Excellent.
In Eureka, Illinois. And so we have a student body population of about 550
That's
or so.
a very small school. Okay.
Very
yeah,
small.
Very small.
And I teach a lot of the biology program, ecology, animal behavior, environmental biology, physiology, comparative vertebrate anatomy, evolution. So a lot of those courses, I'm teaching a lot of those courses. And this semester, I love what I teach this semester. I teach animal behavior and wildlife in America. So excited about this semester.
All right. Well, good. Well, yeah, because you have a pretty heavy teaching load there. So
it's you're squeezing college.
Plus you're squeezing in some research too. So you are really trying to get it done. Are you fully tenured yet, or are you fully promoted?
I am actually looking at that in the next month.
Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. Well, best wishes on that. So we're really glad to have you here. Just everybody, you've done a pile of research on animals that are certainly of interest of wildlife control operators and pest controllers. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of your research background and what your work was?
Absolutely. So I started off working on coyotes as a research organism. I got a little bit of wildlife training actually before that, working with small mammals, just doing small mammal trapping on an ecology project in Cincinnati when I was a bachelor of science student there. Mm-hmm. And I got well versed in working in a genetics lab as an undergraduate at the University of Cincinnati. And I wanted to be a wildlife scientist. I wanted to study wildlife. That's really what I wanted to be. Sure. And so I was looking for master's programs, and there was a program available at Ohio State University with Stan Garrett. And he really wanted me on board so we could do the coyote research, but through the lens of genetics. So, so I got to go out and do some of that trap checking, see how they set the traps. Obviously, they're locked cable traps.
Yep, cable restraint. Yep.
Yes, thank you. It's been a while.
Sure. No. So describe that So the GERT program was outside of Chicago, and they were doing an urban coyote study. And so you were doing the genetic component of that.
Exactly.
I think they were doing all kinds of things with urban coyotes up there.
Yeah, they started trapping coyotes, I believe, in 2000.
Yeah, it was a long project.
It's huge. And they were pulling blood samples off each animal, in addition to radio collaring and ear tagging, of course, and taking the general biometrics. And that was part of the disease program, the disease analysis.
Yeah.
But then after they looked at what they needed for the disease metrics, they had all these blood samples and tissue samples from road-killed animals in the freezer. And so when I came onto the project, they already had like 150 samples, like just ready to go.
Yeah.
And so they have samples. They know they know which animal the sample came from. They have obviously trapping information or roadkill location. Mm-hmm. And they had, if it was a radio collared animal, they had the radio telemetry locations on that. So then I was using that information with the genetic analysis. So like for each animal, building a genome, I believe I was using 12 microsatellites markers.
Okay.
So each individual animal has a unique genome, but each animal has 2 alleles at each marker, 1 from each parent. So especially for the pups that are pulled out of dens, identifying the parentage of those pups, confirming that they came from the same 2 parents, and verifying that coyotes were actually monogamous. So that was the big.
Oh, okay. So there's not some straying there.
We really thought they would be because everybody else does.
Okay.
Everybody else that has been studied, including wolves, has been shown to be there's a little bit of messing around.
Yeah. Okay.
And let me couch this carefully.
Sure.
It's possible that this is special for some reason to the urban situation.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah.
It's possible because nobody's investigated parentage analysis or monogamy on this level in more natural situations for coyotes. I don't know. It's possible.
Sure.
But you've got the territories directly abutting each other.
Mhm.
There's plenty of opportunity. Coyotes are all throughout that landscape.
Yeah.
The whole project started because Cook County wanted to know, Chris Anker, working with Cook County, wanted to know how many coyotes are there in Chicago. We just give us an idea because people see them, they're worried. Do we need to do something about it? Do we need to manage them? And this project showed that, especially once you got them collared and you start seeing like the kind of ground they cover, they are everywhere.
Yeah.
They are absolutely everywhere. And that kind of blew everyone's mind. Like, we think of them as being, a natural wildlife that needs lots of space. They don't need lots of space. They can live in very small places, shockingly small places sometimes.
What was the smallest home range that you saw? Do you remember?
Smallest home range? I can't give you a direct number, but I would say, and there's lots of papers on that from the Chicago project. But I would say that resource density directly correlates to home range size. Yeah. So if resources are high,
they don't need to move as much.
You don't need to move as much. And why would you? Because every time you're moving, you're exposing yourself to risk.
Sure.
So you see smaller home ranges where the resources are really nice and rich. And an earlier student before I came on the project, Paul Morey, he looked at the diet analysis, and that showed that they're not really eating that much garbage. They're actually not eating as much, like even scavenging as much as we thought they would be. They're still sticking to that small mammal diet that they normally do.
Wow. Okay. So you demonstrated, so at least in that urban area, the females and males, so there wasn't mixed parentage for the young, I guess is the way to say it. So that's rather interesting. And there's been some research out of Alabama, and I'm wondering if they're going to do that kind of genetics work as well. Of course, it's all boils down to money, but at least you had the data all there, and they're trying to maximize the value of what they collected, which is really to make the cost savings, to really maximize that kind of work. So what other type of research work have you been involved in?
So that was the coyotes. And then for my PhD research, I worked on, again, it was genetics, but it was a range of small to medium-sized mammals and how interstate highways affect their population genetics. So if there's a boundary in a landscape, and it's a very effective boundary, then if you take genetic samples from one side of the boundary and genetic samples from the other side, and you get enough of those, and you run the markers on those, you would see, using Bayesian software, that there are distinct differences between those two populations. If the boundary isn't actually a boundary and they're crossing it just fine, then everybody's basically got the same signatures. And there's a lot.
Does the width of the road matter? Or is it more the volume of vehicles going across?
It really depends on the species.
Okay.
So it really depends on the species. It depends on the landscape. Are there other means for them to cross? So what we found, first of all, fox squirrels, we found, let me run over the species. Sure. It was white-footed mice, which are super easy to catch, right? Mm-hmm. Sherman traps. Yeah. A little bit of peanut butter on oats, right?
Right.
Eastern chipmunks, same deal, Sherman traps.
Yeah.
and then the next animal up is gray squirrels, fox squirrels,
Right.
and then Virginia possums. So we are catching the gray squirrels and fox squirrels in like a tomahawk trap, squirrel size tomahawk.
Cage trap. Yep.
Yeah, and using walnuts, and that was such an ordeal, like finding the right kind of walnuts, finding the right thing that would bait them.
Really? Okay.
Squirrels don't want to go into traps in the forest. Why would they? I mean,
well, I guess I've never really had to trap a squirrel in a forest, but I was trapping in more urban areas, so I'd have to think about that. Yeah, that's interesting.
It was awful. So we started off with black walnuts, and they were just not interested.
Okay.
And then we moved to English walnuts, and they had to be fresh.
What was the walnut you were using?
English.
English walnut.
The kind you eat, the kind you buy at the store. That's an English walnut, right?
All right.
In the shell, so they stay fresh longer, and still not catching enough. So we actually had to rely on hunters to help us out to get enough samples.
You didn't mix it with peanut butter or something more odorous, or what about moving the trap off the ground?
That was one thing we did not try, but the problem was to get that to work. And I've seen other papers where that works better.
Yeah.
To get that to work, you have to really put in the infrastructure work of putting up like shelves. Right. You've got to put a wooden shelf on the tree.
Yeah.
And in a lot of places we were trapping,
Yeah, put the trap on top. Yeah.
You got to trap. A lot of places we were trapping was on private property, and people were very generous with allowing us to access their property and put traps on their property. But I wouldn't have felt comfortable with that extra layer.
Even using a wrap rather than drilling into the tree, just wrap it to place. I mean, it would have added more time to be sure, but if you just had it 6 feet off the ground, it might have made a big difference.
That might have made the difference. We never did try that. We went backwards and forwards all over that situation. This is one
of my concerns, and that is I would love to see researchers and like yourself and others have a lot more dialogue with the wildlife control community, and at least as far as methodology is concerned. Because what I find when I'm reading some journal articles, they would say, "Oh, we threw out traps to catch XYZ," and then that's all you hear about it. And I'm like, "How did you do it? What were the methods that you used for that?" That's what I'm interested in. And then what I find at times when there are researchers like yourselves who are, and it's not just you, there are others that have some challenges, and some of that work's already been done in the wildlife control field. And it would save, I think, the grad students an inordinate amount of time wasted on reinventing the wheel when there are people out there that, oh my gosh, it's what they know from their experience is truly amazing.
And I regret that we didn't do that, because we really kicked rocks for a semester.
And I would think that we have some people in our own audience that would have had some answers with that. But in any event, it was just a side note. So you did that kind of work, and you were finding, and so what were some of the major findings that you've had?
Okay, so also Virginia possums and also raccoons, and those are the large ones. Yeah, so all those guys.
Wow.
And so we were doing ear tagging, and we radio collared the raccoons and the squirrels, because there was a third student on the project that was doing radio telemetry work.
Okay.
To see like if they're crossing, where are they crossing? So where are we seeing those patterns? And so what we found with that was couldn't get a lot from the mice data. It looked like the mice were crossing the road just fine, which they would be, because there's drainage culverts everywhere.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, and that was actually one of like the original proposal for the project, and this was funded by the non-game division of the Indiana DNR.
Sure.
But
okay. Pittman Roberts funds.
Yeah, but they wanted the information because there's a new highway being built, a new interstate highway being built from Indianapolis down to Evanston,
okay.
the southwest corner of the state. And one of the original metrics that we wanted was that we're going to pick sites that have forest habitat on either side of the interstate highway that already limits you to the southern half of the state. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, it has to be without drainage culverts and without underpasses, because that would be too much of an easy way for the animals to cross. Okay. And no way. I mean, you can't walk. I walked along I get out of the truck, walk along the interstate highway, looking at the structure, and I'm like, Of course there's drainage culverts. It would
Right.
be dangerous to not have drainage
Right.
culverts.
Yeah.
So then what we did instead was I walked along when we picked those sites and we got permission to trap and all that other stuff. I walked along the sites and then documented the size and the conditions of each of those. So like, are they covered with some kind of screen? Are they, do they have an active creek running through them? That kind of things that might influence things. Mice, we saw no difference. So they're either crossing just fine, or the genetic data aren't very well resolved because they breed so fast. It's hard to get a population signature.
Yeah.
Gray squirrels consist of at the few sites we were able to, I think we only had them for 3 sites where we had enough of them on either side. And again, like I said, we got help from hunters. I got in touch with squirrel hunters, everyone I could get in touch with. Could you hunt this area because you're squirrel hunting anyway?
Right.
And get me some of your ears. Just give me ears and bags, because I just need the ears from those sites.
Okay.
And that was so helpful. The gray squirrels did not experience the interstate highway as a boundary if there was a bridge nearby. So they were crossing over the bridge. And this is normal road bridges. These aren't like wildlife bridges, right? We don't have those in Indiana. These were like, they were either crossing over the bridge where the cars go, or they were crossing on the structure under the bridge, which is quite possible.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So they were, in other words, they weren't they were trying to avoid the highway if they could. They were using the bridge over the highway or a tunnel under the highway.
We don't think they were using the tunnels under the highway, but we don't know what the fox squirrels were doing because we didn't see any at the 4 sites we had enough fox squirrels trapped to do the analysis. There was never a signal of a boundary being there. So fox squirrels are having no problem getting across. And I personally have witnessed fox squirrels crossing interstate highways. Yeah. I've seen that myself. Yeah. So either they're just intelligently crossing over, or they're crossing under, or they're crossing with a bridge. I don't know.
Wow.
But
and how about the possums? How about the possums and raccoons?
That was surprising because we thought for sure there would be no signal of a barrier effect, because possums and raccoons, as we all know, are crossing all the time.
Sure.
They would have no problem crossing under a culvert. They're not going to be scared of the dark. They're not going to be scared of predators in that way. And yet we did see a signal of raccoon. Actually, the raccoons had a differentiation signal at a site. And I went back to that site, like, what is going on here? It was the 2 sites around Seymour and Columbus. And I went back to those sites, and at those sites, the culverts were covered by a metal grate. And so that forced them to choose to go over the road.
Right.
And that's it. That's the only way they're going to disperse, by going over the road. They couldn't go under.
And why was it covered? To prevent beaver activity?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I don't know what. I tried to find out, why do they choose certain coverings in certain places? Yeah. It wasn't just like, here's the culvert, like a big round opening.
Right.
The covering wasn't directly on that part of it. It was where the road meets the side of the road. There was a slanted, like metal grating over that.
Yeah.
And I maybe a small raccoon could get through that, but it would be a child. I don't think an adult raccoon could get through that. Yeah. Why they cover it like that, I have no idea. In some places, people cross through them, and maybe they were discouraging people from using them, but I don't know.
Yeah, because a raccoon can often get through. I mean, my rule of thumb is a fist, so it's about 4 inches or so. If you can 4 inches is what a raccoon can often get through. Now, maybe you have some larger, of course, as you get farther north, some of the raccoons are bigger. So, I mean, just adjust that a little bit. So that's fascinating. So you're doing some research now on opossums, because we connected over your question about our what did I mean when I wrote an article for, I think it was Pest Control Technology magazine, I believe it was.
I think Pest Management Professional.
Okay, yeah, boy, I'm going to get in trouble for that. Yeah. So that was back in 2015, and you asked me whether possums were the only, what I meant by continent, because everyone hears, at least I'm going to say everyone, says that possums are the only marsupial in North America. Right. And so And I said, well, I meant North America. I mean, I'm trying to divine my mind five years ago. But in any event, so it turns out that that's false.
Yeah.
So I have an error in my article, everybody. You heard it here first. So do tell more about that in terms of where that, because you're chasing that myth basically up, right? So talk about that.
Yeah. So I was trying to kind of pin down, like, where did this myth get started, and where are people getting it from? So I reached out to you, and I really appreciate your feedback, because you were very open about, well, I think this is where I found it. I think I've heard that before.
Truth matters. And I think I might know the publication I got it, and I just have to chase it up for you. So remind me to follow that up. Remind me to follow that up.
I have a running tally of where I'm seeing this.
I think I can look at a publication. I need to look at it where I might have seen it.
And it's very frustrating for me. So, and friends of mine have said this. I've had friends of mine that study possums, and I was reading a friend of mine's paper. I'm not gonna say his name, and it's about possums, and it says right there in the opening, it's the only marsupial in North America.
North America, right? Yeah.
Peer-reviewed wildlife journal, scientific journal.
Well, mine wasn't that, so mine wasn't that. So let's talk for our audience who may not know what a marsupial is. Why don't we define what a marsupial is, and then we can say, and then tell us whether how many marsupials we have in America, continental America, and then maybe if there's Canada, and then of course Mexico, and you can describe that a little more.
Yeah, that's a great way to go into it. Okay, so there's three types of mammals. There's your monotremes that lay eggs, your platypus, and your echidnas. And I think there are like 4 species of echidnas.
Okay.
And those are in New Zealand and Australia. Then everybody else is either a marsupial, or which is called a metatherian, or a placental mammal, which is called a eutherian. Okay. So marsupials are animals that they do get pregnant in the normal way, but there's no placenta that attaches to the uterus of the female. So the egg develops to a certain point, then the embryo must essentially climb its way from the vagina to the pouch, the marsupium. And that, I mean, if you've watched videos of this is really insane. You see this tiny little just way undercooked little embryo, climbing for its life, trying to find its mom's nipple. Right. And I mean, that's really incredible is what it,
I mean, listen, the average opossum is dead, right? I mean, because the survival rate's pretty tough. They're an amazing creature. I like
They are so amazing.
They are amazing creatures. Yeah, I mean,
they're so amazing. And so the way that the continents used to be connected, all the marsupials were here in the Americas. Yeah. And we were connected to Australia at that time, and then the continent shifted, and now you have marsupials in Australia, where they were not outcompeted by the placental mammals, because like we just said, like that is an extreme mortality risk to overcome at the embryo stage. So placental mammals are keeping their embryos safe until they're ready to come out. And then when they're ready to come out, for most mammals, they're on their feet within an hour and running around, right? Right. That's a species, that's a type of evolutionary strategy that's going to outcompete the marsupial, because more of them are going to survive. So in Australia, you have the greatest diversity of marsupials, and that's what most people think of when they say marsupial. They're like, oh, Australia.
Sure. Like what, kangaroo, right? And that's
kangaroo,
the big one. Yeah, kangaroo.
Yeah. Because they're all there, because there weren't placental mammals to compete with them. Here, we also have marsupials, the majority of them in South America and Central America. And they do have to compete with placental mammals, so there aren't as many of them. And our Virginia opossum is the only one in the U.S. and Canada, naturally occurring in the U.S. and Canada. Right. And in Mexico, there are 7 more species of marsupials.
Now, are they possum-like? Or are they more tree dwellers? I mean, what
Well,
type of
the
opossum?
common possum looks exactly like the Virginia possum, just
Oh,
beefier and it's meaner and doesn't play dead. I mean, I have no problem handling possums. I've
yeah,
handled hundreds of possums. You just kind of roll the trap a little bit, grab the tail, and pull them out,
sure.
and they're just like, bah! You don't have
Yeah.
to use any drugs or anything. Um, the common possum, Didelphis marsupialis, is not friendly and doesn't play dead and is apparently more aggressive.
Okay. All right.
And then the other ones, yeah, most of them are arboreal, tree dwelling.
Tree dwelling.
The Virginia possum is kind of half and half. Like they're a lot on the
Yeah.
ground, they're also in trees, you know. Um, but yeah, yeah, and then you move further south, and there are even more species of marsupials. So that's the point at which I have taken interest in, is people saying the only species of marsupial in
In
North
North
America,
America, right? And
because
so
because North America includes Mexico,
that's correct, right?
and there are 8 species total of marsupials in Mexico. And then I really dug into this because I just wrote a paper. I just submitted it to American Midland Naturalist,
Okay.
and that was last Tuesday. I haven't heard back yet, so fingers crossed they didn't just reject it out of.
That's good. I love that journal. It's got some really neat articles in it. I find it much more practical for the kind of work that I'm involved in. And then some of the others are a little bit too modeling. And there's, some like, what does this got to do with me? But I like American Midland Naturalist. It just seems very down to earth and useful.
It is. I agree with that. Absolutely. And I also
Yeah.
really like I like that down to earth. I like
Yeah.
that because I feel like when I go to read an article from American Midland Naturals, I never feel like they're talking over anyone's head.
No, no.
Um,
And everyone, if you could get a hold of articles from American Midland Naturalist, you will find it helpful for your business. I encourage our audience to try to pick at least one article a week and just challenge yourself and learn something new. And I even had a podcast on how to read a journal article so that, what parts you can skip if you want to skip and read, and so that you can, because these guys are busy, because their time is money in this
oh
industry.
yeah,
So
absolutely,
get to the bottom, get to the point. And so we encourage that. American Midland Naturalist is certainly one to imbibe of if you have the opportunity.
If you're looking for the practical
Yeah.
application of science,
Yep.
that is an excellent one.
They really do some interesting work there.
Yeah. And the Wildlife Science Bulletin, which doesn't exist anymore, used to always be a really awesome one too.
What happened to it?
They ended it in 2004 or 5.
Oh, what a shame.
And it was a huge kerfuffle. It made a lot of people really upset that they were ending it, because it was kind of the more practical, applied side of wildlife science. And then they replaced it with what's called the wildlife professional, and that's
from the Wildlife Society. Yes. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes. Oh, it's. I like the professional magazine. It's got some good stuff in it, but it's sometimes a little bit too human interest for me. It sometimes it gets a little dominated by that. So it's like, I'd like to have a little bit more for the art.
Yeah. It was supposed to replace what was lost with the Bulletin, but I think you're right. I think it still goes more towards the conservation edge or side of things, and a lot of lots of really glossy pictures, and it's like, and education, a lot of education-based articles.
Sure. Well, it's they got to feed their market a little bit. It's hard to, because in wildlife control we don't have a journal that really addresses a lot of the issues. You have human wildlife conflicts, or like now it's human wildlife interactions. They changed the journal name, which is probably the closest, but nothing that really bridges the suburban urban divide there, that really addresses urban wildlife. What I mean, urban, even suburban areas or heavily human impacted areas. You don't have anything that really addresses that niche. And so, because everyone wants to study animals, they want to study the bear out in nature, because it's much more glamorous than trying to chase a raccoon down an alley, right? So no one wants to do that, and there's just no money in it for some reason. And so it's kind of sad, because there are big needs in the wildlife control community in urban environments, in terms, why are they that it would be nice to see addressed. And I'm hoping that with new urban work, maybe they will. The problem is what I find is urban work tends to be going more animal protectionist at times. It seems like that's their perspective rather than recognizing how some of these animals are really damaging structures. So it'd be nice to have a lot more attention in that regard. I mean, I'd like to see more research on exclusion. Because I disagree with the notion of the bifurcation is lethal control and non-lethal control. Well, I think that's a false dichotomy. I would call it, I think it's more of a range. It's lethal, less lethal, and non-lethal, right? Because we haven't proven that one-way doors are always non-lethal. You know, when you're excluding a squirrel from their condominium, and namely your house, and now you're sending them out to the slums, that the tree, how is that non-lethal in the middle of February in a snowstorm?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't understand that.
Do they survive that?
Do they survive that?
Are you actually being more cruel?
I would like to see that. So that's my question. So just asserting it, well, you didn't kill it directly. Well, what's that mean?
So what?
Yeah,
I mean,
so what?
end result, you know.
Right.
And I feel the same way, not to diverge too far, but the same way about the trap and release stuff.
Yeah.
Because people think that's the nice thing to do. I'm sure you've addressed that on your show.
Translocation, yeah, a lot of, yeah, well, I'll probably talk, I don't know if I have a specific podcast on that, but I probably should, because I think I might have mentioned it in different things. It's not always as humane as people think it is. It's a feel good. It's not always dangerous.
Plus, I would love to talk with you again about that one, because there's a lot of the data that show, like, they'll put a radio collar on the nuisance coyotes in Chicago. They'll catch them somewhere in someone's backyard. They'll release it at the nature reserve. Right. And guess what happens?
It gets whacked. Or it gets, yeah. So why is it so many states have not forced the issue with wildlife control operators? Wildlife control operators are trapping, in some cases, thousands of animals a year in terms of a single business, but yet they're allowed to translocate. And so why haven't state agencies caught up and said, why aren't they looking at the data here and saying, what are they doing with all these animals? Like in Massachusetts, I'm very critical of my home state. It's not a very bright state in a lot of different ways, but they did not permit the translocation of wildlife. And so I have to give them kudos. The devil is due for at least that. You could release it on property. If I caught a squirrel in your basement, it came down the chimney, I could release it in the backyard. But once I took it off your property, it was to be destroyed.
I feel like that might be the rule in Illinois, but I have to look it up.
But in terms like Michigan, there's people that are translocating issues. Other states, it's just this. What is the rhyme or reason biologically? Wisconsin, I think, is another state that allows a lot of translocation. It's what is the rhyme or reason to this?
Maybe it saves money. Maybe
it's definitely cheap. It's definitely cheaper for the wildlife control operator, and it definitely allows them the halo with their client. Oh, you're not killing it.
We're putting him back where he belongs.
That's right. We're putting it back in nature because there's this alleged massive void of animals in this natural environment, right? So, but this is the mythology of America, right? We think that there's these empty places to just dump animals.
Somewhere over there.
That's right.
That's where it goes, is a magic place over there.
Yeah, but there's tremendous resistance in this regard, for various reasons. So yeah, we probably should have a good long talk about the problems of that. I was actually supposed to be writing an article with a professor down in Arizona about translocation, and that just hasn't gone anywhere. But I got a whole bunch of articles on different translocation because he's trying to fight that battle where he's at in Arizona. And so it's a real problem.
It's a good battle to fight, because here's something I feel about having studied road ecology and mammals is, there's more than just the animal getting hit by the car. I read the newspaper, and I encounter every once in a while the articles that say, 19-year-old veered off the road. No one knows why. They didn't have their phone out, and they're wrapped around a tree, and we can't ask them now.
That's right.
What happened? Right. And I say, well, what did happen? I mean, they're in their car by themselves. They weren't using their phone. Is it possible they swerved to avoid a raccoon? I think
that's very possible.
You never know.
That's right.
And on top of that, just with the vehicular collisions that we know about 200 people die every year in the United States because of deer collisions.
Sure.
And no one's translocating deer, but you're translocating
Right.
raccoons, coyotes,
Yep.
possums, squirrels, whatever. And I was a dumb teenager. Once I swerved to avoid wildlife, and then I never did that again.
Yeah. Slow down.
I almost ran
Try to
off the road.
stop. Don't swerve.
Yeah, gently press on the brakes. You might get lucky, but don't swerve, don't slam.
Yeah. It's
not worth it.
But I would like to, but our roads are really killing fields, and I would like to see more effort being done to make our roads a little bit more friendly for animals to cross, because we are killing stuff at a staggering pace. I guess I'm not as worried about squirrels. Squirrels seem to be holding up pretty well. But when you think about slower moving animal, turtles and snakes, for instance, then you have the people that are constantly driving to the snake to kill it for.
Oh, you saw that video?
I didn't see that video. I just had one person here in Montana say he just moves his car over to or truck, I should say, to make sure he squashes it. And I'm like, what is the? It's just
there's a great video that they made about 10 years ago. They literally set up a rubber turtle on the side of the road, a large rubber like tarantula like spider,
okay,
and a rubber snake, and then they set up a video camera. And then they video taped people and how they responded to that animal on the side of the road. And it was about 10% of people purposely swerved to hit
the animal. Wow.
Yeah.
It's sort of, and I'm like, really? It's like, yeah, I just don't. It's amazing how I love the human psyche, because a lot of our work in wildlife control is really counseling. We're counseling our clients because they're highly stressed that this animal has broken the agreement and invaded their space, right? So they think that there's this relationship. It's like, well, I'm going to leave you out there, and I'm just going to have my space. And of course, the wildlife violate that all the time, and then they're stressed over this. And so there's real issues there in terms of what that dynamic is between humans and how they relate to wildlife, especially as we become more and more urbanized and distanced from wildlife. So what other future research? So you're chasing down this opossum issue.
Well, so it's the continental issue where people keep saying it's North America.
Right, the continent. You're chasing down that issue.
I understand why it's a popular myth. Like, it sounds so cool. It's the only marsupial, like obviously they're not endangered, so we can't be interested in them for that reason. But we're interested in them because they're the only one. But I feel like there's something weird going on there. Like, why would you exclude Mexico from North America?
I think the language barrier, and I also just wonder whether we're repeating what other people have written previously. So I think if we chase it back, where did we chase it back far enough?
I've tried to chase it back. I haven't, I don't think I've found the genesis yet.
Right. Article 0, right?
Yeah.
Article 1. Yeah.
But I do, and I argued this in my cover letter to the journal. I do think that continuing to say this is fomenting this concept in people's minds that the U.S. and Canada is North America, and that's it. But
I think it should just, these things happen, because I've seen similar things in extension literature about wildlife management, in terms of how do you get rid of the skunk underneath your deck? Well, you sprinkle powder down on the ground, and we wait for the tracks to show you're leaving, and then close the hole. You see this concept. Thankfully, it's finally beginning to be eliminated, because I don't know who does that, right? And does it work? No. So it's this sort of nonsense. So I think that it's good that you're chasing down. So just a reminder, everyone, I made a mistake. So we're correcting it here. But you're
not the only one.
I'm not alone. Okay, well, that's good. It's always better to be wrong in company than wrong alone. But is there any other research that you're working on besides
the tick thing is a big thing right now that I just submitted for publication. So there's that other myth going around that possums eat ticks by the thousands.
Right.
And this got started with the guy at the Cary Ecology Institute. Why am I blanking on his name right now? It'll come back to me in a second. It'll come back to me. Osfeld. Richard Osfeld.
Yeah, and he basically was just basically looking at possums to see how many ticks they had on them. It was a study out in New York State, right? So didn't they do the work in New York State, upstate New York? There's two different
papers that came out.
Oh, okay.
There's one where they caught possums and looked at how many ticks were on them, and then extrapolated
Right.
to how many they think are in the surrounding environment.
Okay.
And then there's another paper where he's the last author, but Keesing is the first author, and that was published in 2009, where they took 5 Virginia possums
Small
from the
sample.
wild.
Yeah.
They didn't check them for ticks first. They didn't take any ticks off of them. They put them into cages, into dog kennels in a lab. They added 100 larval ticks to them, I believe black-legged ticks.
Okay.
Added them to the possums in the lab. And then over the course of 4 days, they counted all the satiated ticks that would drop off
Okay.
the possum.
Yeah.
So every day they're checking the cage for any ticks that have dropped off. And they didn't find a whole lot of ticks that dropped off. And then they did not check the possums before releasing them back into the wild. They just released them back into the wild. And they said, we didn't find that many ticks that dropped off. Therefore, they ate all of them.
I don't know if I read that one. I have to try to think. Wow. Okay. Well, that's pretty small sample size.
I'll send you the PDF.
Right.
Five
Yeah.
possums. So I've got some issues with that.
Right. Welcome to the peer-reviewed process, everybody. It can be.
I really, I am flabbergasted. I read this because I was like, okay, here's how this all happened.
Yeah.
I had an undergrad that wanted to do research with me. I'm not squeamish at all, so I don't mind picking up roadkill. Lots of my samples have come from roadkill.
Okay.
And she wanted to do a project, and I said, you know what? I keep seeing these stupid memes going around Facebook about possums eating thousands of ticks. Can you please get to the bottom of that? Find out where that's coming from. And she gets into it, and she's like, well, it's coming from an actual paper. Like there was a paper that was peer-reviewed, so it's real. And I'm like, really? And so then I get into it because I hadn't really been on that side of things.
Yeah.
More genetics, less disease, although I've done some disease work too.
Yeah.
And I was really, I'm reading this paper with my jaw dropped the entire time. Like they had 5 possums. Actually, 1 was removed from the study early on because it wasn't doing well. So it's actually 4.
4. Oh gosh.
They didn't check them first. They didn't comb them first. None of the standard procedures you do for checking for ticks.
Right.
And they added the ticks, and then they only counted what dropped off, and then they let them go without checking to see where the rest of them might have been.
Wow.
So yeah, and they're in an air-conditioned lab, and ticks feed slower when it's cooler.
Okay.
And ticks can take 5 to 8 days to reach what's called repletion, filling their bodies up with enough blood that they're going to drop off.
Oh, that long. Oh my gosh, I did not know that. Okay. All right.
That
they weren't ready yet.
Low body temp of possums in the first place because they have a low metabolism.
Yeah.
And then you consider possibly an air-conditioned lab. I don't know. They don't say what temperature the lab is at.
Right.
It is possible that they release those possums back into nature with the majority of those larval ticks still attached to them. But they interpreted it as they ate them.
Wow.
And here's another thing. Here's another problem with that. Animals in captivity are possibly going to act more strangely. They're not, they could do things like they're bored, they're stressed. So it's possible they could be exhibiting grooming behaviors in the captive situation that they might not be in nature.
Yeah.
We don't really know that. We don't really know. No one's done a comparative study of possums in captivity versus in nature, like looking at their behavior.
Yeah.
Although there is a couple of McManus papers, and that guy was like the possum god. He's got some papers like very detailed describing possum behavior in the lab.
All right.
McManus.
Yeah, I'm just writing that down. Well, that's, this is the kind of what's good about this is it helps our audience understand that sometimes the peer review process breaks down, but then you kind of expect the review process as other researchers are evaluating documents that it will be caught up eventually, which is why you always want to be careful with. I used to laugh because I'm from the humanities, and so let me point that out. My training is primarily in the humanities, where we don't take new research as seriously as something that's been 20 to 40 years old. And the reason for that is because older research often has time to get beaten up.
Yeah.
Where just because something is new doesn't necessarily mean there hasn't been enough time for someone to do their PhD and beat the crap out of it, right?
This is the
Where
problem with
in science, it's like, oh, if it's more than 5 years old, it's like, oh, we didn't know anything 5 years ago. It's like, really? What happened? Just everyone's mind just erased. I used to tease the professors on this. Oh yeah, if it's more than 5 years old, it can't be true.
Yeah.
So,
this is
and
really
there's
problematic too, because like something gets published in science and they think the peer review process is so perfect
yeah.
that as soon as it hits the presses, it's real.
Oh, it's
And then
yeah.
the retraction never gets the kind of attention that the original release does.
And people are human. Mistakes happen, and there's, it just that's the way it is. So I appreciate this kind of work. It's not
So here's the bulk of that paper was there was bifurcation here.
Okay.
It was looking at the literature going back to Audubon in the 1800s. So Audubon, going out and exploring, right?
Right.
He did a stomach analysis on Virginia possums, just cut open their stomach and right there in nature, like what's in there, what's it eat? All the way up to, what was the most recent one? The most recent one was pretty recent, actually. I think a PhD dissertation from like 2 years ago, looking at all the diet items found in possum stomachs.
Wow.
And so there are 23 papers that I was able to find. And some of them were theses and dissertations that hadn't really been published per se, but it still counts.
Sure.
With some extremely detailed, some of these people identified each insect part to family, if not to genus and species. So they were extremely careful about what they were. And there were volume-based analyses, like how much of the stomach is insects, how much of it is persimmons or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And then others would be just like, oh, I'm just going to give you a list of everything we found. And you've got that for like specifically for certain regions, specifically for certain states.
Yeah.
They're eating different things in different places, urban versus rural versus, Texas versus Minnesota. So 23 papers in the canon on Virginia possums. Guess how many listed ticks as a diet item?
Zero. Wow. And it's hard-bodied enough to survive some of those gastric juices, right?
Even
So
if you did a stat analysis, you should have found it.
Found something.
Yeah, zero. So then we thought my undergrad and I were like, her name's Caitlin Hild. We're like, okay, well that's one thing, but maybe nobody has looked at stomachs specifically for ticks. Maybe they overlooked it.
Sure. Yeah, that could happen. Yeah.
Right. So we got 30 possum stomach, 32, 31, somewhere around there. Possum stomachs from road-killed animals that were in good enough shape. They weren't totally flattened.
Right.
Got quite a few that way. Got some, the Illinois Department of Transportation helped me out. They got me a couple. But that was not working. I was not getting enough fast enough. And I'm really most interested in the ones in the summertime when the ticks are active.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are disappearing the fastest because of the turkey vultures are here in the summertime. So I'm not getting any at that time of the year. So I reached out to a nuisance wildlife control officer in my area. Actually, I reached out to like everybody.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I can get your possums, no problem. He's killing them anyway. He's euthanizing them anyway.
Absolutely.
It wasn't for the project. It was for, he's doing it anyway. They would have been tossed in his huge backyard. He's got like acres.
Oh dear. Okay.
And he's like, yeah, just let me know when, I'll just start collecting them in my freezer. Just let me know when you're going to pick them up. And I got something like 20 possums from him that way.
So was he able to, how was he killing them? Was he using carbon dioxide?
No,
or shooting? Shot. Okay. So he was able to bag them pretty quickly and toss them in the freezer. Oh, that's pretty good.
That was cool too, because that gives us a better idea of their ectoparasite load, because when you find a road-killed possum, the ectoparasites have had time to drop off. They'll be like, hey, my host is dead. I'm out of here.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas, so that's not going to give you an accurate ectoparasite load. But from him, he shot them, bagged them, and threw them in the freezer, and all those ticks and fleas were still on them. So we could even do an ectoparasite analysis that way and make sure, like, okay, there are ticks on the possums. So ergo, they should be in their stomachs.
Absolutely. Yeah, they have available food source there, right? So, or at least a grooming source. And did you found nothing?
This student, God bless her. I did all the extractions. I pulled all the stomachs out,
Yeah.
put them into ethanol for storage. And
Yeah.
then she would pull them out when she had time. She'd pull out a stomach. She'd cut it open. She would
Oh my
parse
goodness.
out all of the contents into petri dishes and then look at it with a dissecting scope.
Wow.
Did all of them, and she would find interesting things like little bits of plastic, little bits of glass,
Yeah.
a French fry,
French fry. Okay.
grass. They eat a lot of grass. They eat a lot of earthworms.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things she found was an almost entire short-tailed shrew that had not even been chewed up at all. Like the entire
Just swallowed it.
Just swallowed it.
Swallowed it.
And not a single tick.
Wow. 31. 30 or 31? 31.
It was
31.
definitely 31. Now I'm wondering if it's 31 or 32.
Yeah.
But
So
it was,
over how wide of an area was the wildlife control operator's range? Do you have an idea? The service.
He's focusing his work here in Woodford County.
Okay.
But I know he also, he would give me locations. He also had possums he'd get from Peoria and the suburbs around Peoria, East Peoria. So that's like a 45-minute
okay. So
driving distance.
30, 40 miles thereabouts. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more than that because there's a lot of rural areas, suburban area.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm from Ohio.
That's a pretty big range. Yeah. And so, but maybe you have, tick image. What's the theory now? Tick immature. Maybe they're just not trained to remove the ticks from themselves out in your area. They need some remedial training. Yeah. Well, that's great. So, and in the future, what do you have? What's on your horizon for the future as we're beginning to close up here? Do you have anything planned?
My other projects that are ongoing are genetic projects on plant populations. I've got a prairie remnant population study we're doing to see if railroads connect the pollinators between the prairie remnants in central Illinois. There aren't many of them.
Yeah.
And then I've got another project looking at honeysuckle and the effects of honeysuckle removal on spring ephemerals, which are little wildflowers that grow up in forests. And I've got a Franklin ground squirrel project that I already finished up, but I haven't published it yet. So that's my next paper on the docket.
Oh, interesting. And so what were you doing with Franklin squirrels?
Franklin's ground squirrels are declining in Illinois, although not like officially.
Right.
They are.
Yeah.
And we did a diet analysis. That's actually what got us headed down the Virginia possum route, because we already did the diet analysis for the Franklin's ground squirrels, because I worked with a professor at another institution, the Southern Illinois University at Springfield. U of I at Springfield. Get that right. Yeah. University of Illinois at Springfield. She's done a couple of years of Franklin's ground squirrel work, trapping and radio collaring, and you'll just have accidental kills when you do these kinds of things. She's also found roadkill specimens. So she gave me access to those so I could do the stomach analysis on those, because one of the prevailing ideas is the reason why their numbers might be declining is because their favorite foods are orthopterans, which are grasshoppers and crickets and that kind of thing. And the orthopterans are declining.
Wow. And that's probably related to landscape changes?
Landscape changes,
pesticide use. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's that aspect of that project. So I compared stomach analyses from our Franklin's ground squirrels to ones that I got from Canada that have very healthy populations, and just kind of writing that up. And that might just go to like the Illinois Journal of Science or something, because it's not like super exciting, but it's just to put it out there,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, this type of basic research is really important. And, of course, our audience is primarily interested in mammals and in rodents, of course. And we're certainly interested in that. Well, Dr. Hennessy, we're really glad that you came on board, and thanks for sharing your life history and some of the research that you're doing about coyotes. And so you're at Eureka College. Is that correct? So Dr. Hennessy, we're really glad to have you here on the Pest Geek podcast, Living the Wild wildlife. And don't be a stranger. Let's have you back, and we'll talk about translocation and relocation. So that'd be kind of cool. All right. Well, hi, everyone. We're really glad you stayed with us here as we're talking with Dr. Hennessy. And again, I'm Stephen Vantassel. I'm the host of Living the Wildlife. Why do we want you to live the wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. So don't forget to subscribe. If you want to reach out and contact me, I'm available at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Take some time to subscribe. Let us know how we're doing. And yes, even when I'm wrong about opossums are not the only marsupial in North America. So, but they are the only marsupial in the United States, native.
That's right. They are.
United States.
My possum shirt. Mary Trash.
Yeah, I call them four-wheel drive trash cans. I love possums. They are the neatest.
I love them.
They're incredible. They're incredible creatures. So, all right, everybody, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye now.
Bye.